Welcome to the West End Video Newsletter. My name is Joe Pucillo, your host for this week's newsletter. Our co-host today is James Campano, editor of the West End Newsletter, and we have two special guests today. Jerry Pucillo, Director of Housing Development for the Archdiocese of Boston, and Peter Dreier, Director of Housing for the Boston Redevelopment Authority. Hi, Peter. How are you today?
Okay,
Jerry?
Joe. Good.
Welcome
How are you?
to the show.
Thanks a lot.
This is sort of a victory show for all West Enders. We've been waiting for this for over 30 years, and it involves a parcel of land in the old West End of Boston that we've won back for housing, affordable housing for former West Enders. So, Peter, can you go back to the 1950s and tell our audience about what happened to the West End in those days and work your way up to today?
Okay, you're right, Joe. This is a victory party, and I think the victory is not only a victory for the city itself, but for the folks like yourself and Jim that spent the last 30 years fighting this struggle to try to regain some of the dignity and respect that was lost when Jerry Rappaport's bulldozer tore down the West End, and now after a long struggle, the city government, the Flynn administration, has regained the right to build affordable housing on this site next to Charles River Park, called Lowell Square in the old West End. And the story starts back in the 1950s when the political establishment in the city, the business leaders and the city government, the newspapers, all conspired, I suppose is the right word, to try to basically rebuild the downtown by destroying its neighborhoods. I don't think that's too strong a statement. And the way they thought they were going to revive Boston was to tear down what they called slums, which weren't slums, but they said were slums, bulldoze them, and then build upper-class housing and shopping malls and so forth, and try to compete with the suburbs.
In other words, their outcard was to do this was to declare a section a slum area when, in fact, it really wasn't a slum area.
Right.
And take it over to.
Right, and as you know, because you live there, the West End was a great place to live, and people obviously thought it was a great place to live then, and the fact that so many of you have stayed together shows what a sense of community spirit there was, even 30 years later. So anyway, back in the 50s, the city government, the business leaders, the newspapers all declared that the West End, which is on the foot of Beacon Hill and right near downtown, it was a great place if you wanted to walk to work, go to Mass General Hospital, or walk to downtown. They said this is a slum, and they got the right to tear it down. And within a matter of a very short period of time, the bulldozers came with some warning to the folks who were living there, but with a lot of broken promises about what they would get in return for losing their homes and their stores and their way of life. And the urban renewal bulldozer, paid for with federal taxpayers' funds, came into the West End, and within a matter of a few months, the neighborhood was gone. And I've seen lots of photographs of before and after. You live there, so you know a lot better than I do, that it really, for many years, was just a big vacant lot. And what happened is the city government back then decided to award the rights to develop this neighborhood, this old neighborhood, to a development team that included Jerome Rappaport. What emerged there was what we now call Charles River Park, and the shopping mall, and the health club, and the tennis courts, and the high-rise luxury housing, rental and condominium, that we see now. From a point of view of an architect, it's probably not a very good design in retrospect. And from the point of view of city planning, it's one of the biggest mistakes anybody ever made. And as someone who works in the city planning agency, it's kind of an embarrassment. And although fortunately the Flynn administration and Steve Coyle weren't around back then, so it had nothing to do with the mistake. But it just is used in classrooms all over the country. I taught city planning at Tufts, and I know that around the country, the destruction of the West End is used as an example of how not to rebuild cities.
It's one of the publications called the Urban Villages.
Right.
Is used all over the country. In fact, my kids in school had to read that as part of their curriculum. So.
Yeah, Herb Gans lived in the West End for the last year or so before it was torn down, and wrote this book about what a great neighborhood it was. And in the last part of the book, he basically said this is no way to rebuild the city, and I think everybody now agrees with him, although back then he was talking from outer space in terms of what the establishment wanted. Anyway, what happened is that Charles River Park went up. It took a long time to build Charles River Park. There were a lot of delays, a lot of problems. Jerry Rappaport made a lot of enemies in the process. Got very, very wealthy enough to try to buy the U.S. Senate seat for his son recently. Fortunately, was able to do so, and John Kerry won the election. But nevertheless, it was a very lucrative development. And one parcel that was left behind that was never redeveloped was this parcel on Merrimack Street called what we now call Lowell Square. And so the BRA and Mayor Flynn, soon after Mayor Flynn took office, decided we have this incredible opportunity now with this vacant parcel to build some affordable housing here in contrast to the luxury housing that was built there, and give an opportunity for the folks who were kicked out of the neighborhood back in the 50s and 1960 to return to the neighborhood if they want to.
I'd like to agree that the Flynn administration is the first administration in the past 30 years to really take the bull by the horns and go with this and work with the BRA in formulating this.
Well, we thought it was important, the mayor thought it was important that this be a real symbol of a new sense of priorities and what the administration stands for, which is helping people who want to live in neighborhoods and not by rebuilding them and not by tearing them down. So we had a competition, national competition for rebuilding this site. We had a lot of very good proposals come in that had a lot of very interesting schemes. And it was a tough decision, but ultimately the BRA board decided that the best proposal to come in was the one done by the Archdiocese, and that they were going to work with yourselves and the Old West Enders to try to make sure that the new development, the Lowell Square development, is a monument to the old neighborhood that was there before. Not only by having people from the old neighborhood come back and live there if they want to, but also by having an archives and by reminding the public every time they walk into that development when it's built of what was once there. And to be honest with you, as you know better than anyone, there's no way to really completely redress the injustice that was done by kicking 10,000 people out of their homes.
Right. There was a lot of broken hats that came out of the West End because our housing was taken, our schools, our churches, our streets. We had nothing to go back to. So there were a lot of broken hats, and this is at least something to rectify, a little something to rectify. You
can't repair all those broken hearts, but you can try at least to do what's possible within the limitations of one parcel.
And believe me, there are thousands of West Enders who are still in contact with each other and are grateful for this day to have hopes of going back there to live.
So what we're going to do is, as soon as, well, to go back a second, we had this competition. The Archdiocese was awarded, was selected to be the winner. We still have to formalize that, but that's just a matter of a formality. And we hope to break ground, hopefully 1991. Unfortunately, soon after the BRA and the Flynn administration had the competition, up to the plate once again stepped Jerome Rappaport and Charles River Park, Inc., and contested the city's right to build anything on that parcel, saying that back in the 1950s, the city gave Charles River Park, Inc., Jerry Rappaport, the right to develop that parcel. And we said, no, you didn't have the right to develop that parcel. You had plenty of time to do something. You didn't. The city reverts the right to develop that parcel, reverts back to the city. And he took us to court.
How dare him, huh, Peter?
Well, he's taken the city to court many times, and each time he's lost. He tried to stop the city's linkage program, which has provided millions of dollars for affordable housing in the city's neighborhoods. He illegally converted a number of the apartment buildings in Charles River Park to condominiums without getting the approval of the city, which was required. So we had to contest that in court, and we won that case. So we were pretty confident, but we knew that, the court the process grinds pretty slowly. Eventually, we won the case that said that the BRA had the right to develop the parcel, and the Charlesville Park Inc. and Rappaport did not have the right to develop it. Again, he appealed it, so we had to go back into court to see whether the Supreme Judicial Court would confirm the city's right. Last month, the Supreme Judicial Court did uphold the appeals court decision, and so now it's free and clear. And that's what the victory is about. Is that last month the Supreme Judicial Court basically said that the city had the right to take this parcel and develop it the way it was meant to be developed, which is for affordable housing. And so now that the legal obstacles have been overcome, we're looking forward to working with the Archdiocese, with Jerry Pucillo and Mike Groden, with the Old West Enders and the CDC, the nonprofit group they set up, to put at least 250, 260 units of affordable housing on the site with the archives, with some child care, make it a real living monument to people rather than to money and greed. And I think that once it's built, which will probably be sometime beginning this year, we'll break ground. Beginning next year, 1991, we'll break ground. People will be proud that their hopes and dreams, that they waited this long to see their hopes and dreams realized. And again, even though we can't bring all their homes back, this is, I think, a testament to the kind of staying power and persistence that particularly you guys had, but also I think you have to give Mayor Flynn and Coyle credit for sticking it out. There are a lot of times when other mayors or other BRA directors would have tried to cut a deal and compromise and give Rappaport the right to develop some of it and then, you know, have a smaller parcel. But we knew we were both morally right and legally right. And in the end, we were proven to be correct, and things worked out pretty well.
How well spoken. Everything you're saying is right on the money and true. And boy, so many people are happy for this day. It's really, really a joy to be here.
Well, it's a great victory for everybody, and the persistence of the Old West End group really was kind of the cheerleaders, giving the city the moral uplift they needed to keep going. So it's been a great partnership.
Good. And not only that, is the way this development happened 30 years ago, or where Rappaport was part of the city administration, and that's how he got involved. He claims that, oh well, I was the only developer that had the guts to go in and sure, he got the most choicest parcel of land in the city of Boston and developed it with taxpayers' money. And he claims, can you tell us a little bit about that? Or?
Well, from what I know and the research I've done and read about, Jerome Rappaport was the campaign manager for Mayor Hines, and after the election, went to work for him as his top aide. Decided after a few years working for city government that he preferred making money to making policy. Probably figured he could make policy anyway from behind the scenes, and so helped to pave the way while he was in City Hall and in the urban renewal program of Boston. And then after he left City Hall and became a lawyer and a developer again, was selected to be the developer. You couldn't do that today.
How cozy wasn't that?
I mean, that'd be like me putting out a proposal for a development parcel in the city, quitting my job, hanging around for a couple of months, and then bidding on the parcel and winning. You couldn't do that. You couldn't even do that legally right now. But back then the rules were not so clear and things were a lot fuzzier. And so he got the right to develop the parcel. And you're right, he did it with a lot of federal money. The federal government paid for tearing down the buildings. It paid for assembling the parcel. It paid for writing down the cost of the land, putting in all the sewers and all the roads. And I mean, it was really a subsidized development, even though wealthy people were enticed to live there. And on the back of that subsidized development, Jerome Rappaport became a very wealthy person, and using his wealth became a very influential person in city government, even though he was no longer part of the city administration. During the years of Kevin White in particular, he was a very important behind-the-scenes character. And in fact, in many ways, had as much bad influence on the city's development as a private developer as he did as the developer of Charles River Park. He had a lot of influence in the city council.
He was called...
He was often called by the press the 14th city councilor. And, you know, through his campaign contributions and influence, was, I think, a very detrimental force to providing affordable housing. Every time there was some initiative by the city council or by community organizations to protect poor people and elderly people from being kicked out of their homes, or to try to get linkage, or to try to do something positive in the city, there was Jerry Rappaport trying to stop it.
Okay.
But you know what's interesting now is that hopefully now that we've won this victory, now that we've won every lawsuit that Jerry Rappaport has fought us on, the era of Jerry Rappaport and his son is behind us.
Right.
And I think in some ways dwelling on the past is important because you can learn a lot of lessons, but I think what's important and exciting now is we can look to the future and see that Lowell Square is part of Boston's future, no longer just part of its past.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much, Peter, for being so informative and bringing us up to date. And now we're going to go to a tape of the Old West End. Okay, here's the tape I just told you we're going to be seeing, and it involves a picnic that we held on a Lowell Square parcel that we just won for Farmer West Enders, and over 300 Farmer West Enders showed up that day for this picnic, and Jimmy Campano will explain to you a little bit about who was there and what happened that day.
It was a nice, bright, sunny day, and Peter Dreier dropped down and said hello, and a representative from the Archdiocese and 300 other people from the West End dropped by, and we had pizza and Coca-Cola, and that was about it for refreshments, but everybody was there and had a good time. We taped some of it here, as you can see.
There was a lot of reminiscing, Jimmy, about the old days, and people who lived right on that parcel came by, and they here, I used to live right here, and they say, I'm going to come back here someday, too.
It was a good day. It was sunny. It worked real well.
And it was great to hear people talk about the shops and who lived where and so forth, and you know, and I saw people that hadn't seen each other in a while talking to each other and reminiscing. It was really it was like a little bit of oral history right there. You know?
Quite common of what happens when West Enders get together. Sit around and
as soon as the West Ender they meet each other. The hugs and the smiles and the kisses and the love comes back, and that's what the West End was all about. It was people of all nationalities and all colors, and we lived together as one unit, no matter who you were or what status.
Close-up of this T-shirt. That's Jerome Rappaport. That's the T-shirts we used to picket him in front of his realty office and in front of the AJC committee. Somebody taped this to the door, so I figured we'd take a picture of it.
That was the outhouse.
Right. It said another Jerome home.
Right.
Peter, what did you observe as the West Enders talking about going back? Did you hear many people?
I thought there was a lot of enthusiasm. I mean, to be honest with you, I was a bit surprised. 30 years later, you'd think a lot of people had settled into their new homes and their new neighborhoods and would try to not try to relive the past that way. But what was really interesting was how many people were willing and interested in coming back and living downtown again.
People don't realize that we have our West End newsletter that goes out to over 3,000 former West Enders, and there are thousands or hundreds that do want to come back. And I've heard many statements saying there are no West Enders left, but believe me, we're out there and we do want to come back. Well, we're back live now at the studio, and we're going to the second segment of our show, and our co-host Jimmy Campano will tell us what this is about.
Well, okay, we just this is part of the victory celebration you just saw around there. That was part of it, and this show is to supplement it. We're here to show our enthusiasm about beating Jerry Rappaport in Charles River Park. But we also have Jerry Pucillo here from the Archdiocese Office of Urban Planning. And I'm going to ask him some questions. And one of them was, this victory was especially special to West Enders historically. Why was it special to the city and Archdiocese?
I think it's important to recognize that the Archdiocese had never competed for development offered by the city of Boston. Although we've been in the housing development business for 20 years trying to create affordable housing in areas that needed it, we never competed for a city of Boston parcel or in a public way until this parcel. And the reason we chose to do that was, as Peter had mentioned earlier in the show, it is a symbolic site. It does have a very significant past, and we hope that it will have a significant future. So I think that the idea is the reason we competed for it, and I think ultimately the reason why the city chose to move along with us is that we've had a long history in the city of Boston, and we hope that this site will just help us to sort of right what we see as a wrong, essentially.
That's right. Sounds about right, anyway. What do you think about the special attachment that West Enders had to the area? I know you know a little bit about it because since we won the case, I've been sending all the phone calls and inquiries your way. So.
Well, actually, it's been a lot of fun since the case has been finally settled for me and for the office staff, because we are getting phone calls now quite regularly from former West Enders, and in an otherwise busy day, you'll take a call and you'll end up talking for a few minutes anyway to everybody that calls, and it's a fun experience because many people almost anticipate or believe that you were there 30 years ago, and the names of streets roll off people's tongues, and of course you remember, and I don't remember, but it's fun. I expect.
Everybody wants to get their little piece back again.
Right.
Yeah. Sort of they felt that something was taken away from them, so now they want to, they want to get that little piece back. Although it's going to be a little piece, I mean, it's never going to be the same.
Well, I think that's part of the challenge.
You have to realize that. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
I think that's part of the challenge to this development. In doing housing development, we very often work with the local communities.
Mm-hmm.
And in looking at this particular site, in driving by it, you'd say, well, there's no neighborhood here, so it's a very simple development to do, and you'll be able to please the neighbors who aren't there. Well, in fact, there's like a silent neighborhood out there, and what is going to be a challenge for me is working with the former West Enders. It's going to be a challenge to walk through the design, development of this project, think about how the history of the West End gets retold or told, because that will be a significant piece of this development. So I think, in a way, it's a challenge, and it's something that I am personally looking forward to.
Especially with the archive, when we put the archive in. I personally think, there are West Enders all over the country. Okay, I think would bring people back. I think it will be used quite considerably. Now, I don't know in what form it will take, or exactly what it was, or how it would, be implemented. But I think it will be a draw.
I think the other thing that's interesting about this development, although it's producing some housing units, and those housing units are going to be populated hopefully by a number of former West Enders, the other significant part to this development for us is that we are helping to create and work with a new emerging West End Community Development Corporation. And that corporation, that's the beginning, I think, of a new era for the West End, in that as we go through these stages, I expect that the CDC that develops will take things further, that as opportunities become available in the parameters of the West End or the extended West End, both now and in the future, this group will be able to identify them and have the experience then to work with emerging developments such as Boston Garden and other developments in the locality.
Well, right now the only law in the area is Jerome Rappaport. I mean, he more or less, as the 14th city councilor, he more or less has his say, which, as everybody saw in the Vilma show, what happened up there. With the CDC, if we were in there, it would sort of offset some of that political power, if it works that way.
Well, I think it will. I think that there's a new voice about to be heard. I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a premier development in terms of its scale and its design. I think is wonderful. And so I think we can expect to...
Well, the other housing in the area, the Amy Lowell and the Blackstone, they're more or less like old folks' homes, okay? And they're not really affordable housing. It's affordable housing, but it's like more or less for retirement or for disabled people. This will be the first new housing in the area, you know, affordable housing in the area for 30 years. How do you think it will affect the area?
I think it will be terrific. I don't think you'll see any, you know, people often say mixed income housing brings the market values down in the locality, and I'm sure the major real estate holder in the area or holders in the area will be concerned. But it's been our experience in all the developments we've done, and as I said, we've been doing this for 20 years. We have never seen any significant or any decreases in market value for its surrounding homes. In fact, many of the people on the streets around the developments we have developed homes have ended up moving into our developments because they've liked them so much, or their property values have radically increased due to the development of the properties in the neighborhood. So I think that in some ways is a paper tiger, and I hope that
I believe so. Yeah.
that will not be a focus, although we're always prepared for that to arise.
Well, it was a long, protracted legal fight. Do you think it was worth it? We think it was, you know. We just wanted to...
Well, in the scheme of things, you know, I think the interesting thing about working for an archdiocese or the Catholic Church for me is that we think in time frames of decades. And so the fight was a long fight. You've been working on this for decades, and I expect the Archdiocese to be around for even longer. So,
well, they've been around for
me, it's been a long fight, but it's a well-fought fight, and I think it symbolically it's been exciting, and I'm prepared to start.
There's been some question of Jerome Rappaport's powers in a butter. They claim, there are people that claim that he has certain legal rights that could put a glitch onto it. So either of you think that he can put a glitch into the project, like keeping it, so many feet from this, not going so high or whatever.
The proposal that the Archdiocese made fit within the existing zoning standards for the area, and that basically is the law about what's allowed to be built there. So there might be rumors to that effect that Rappaport's going to have a new ace up his sleeve, but I think his day is over.
I think we feel the same thing. Clearly, we are hoping for a smooth process.
Oh, okay. I turn the show back to Joe. I think it's almost time to go. We appreciate having both of you here today.
My pleasure.
This has been a long time coming. This has really, really been great. I've been looking forward to this day for many years, and it's really a pleasure to have Peter and Jerry and Jimmy, us all together here for this victory celebration show. And as I say, I'll say it again, many, many people are so happy that this day has come. And we are looking forward to the future and working with you to the future to bring back a lot more happiness to Farmer West Enders. Thank you for being here today.
Great.
And see you at the next West End video newsletter.
Covered now with lines and creases, tickets torn.